house looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe it was just me, older, sharper, less willing to let nostalgia soften the edges. 25 years is a long time to stay away from your own family. I parked across the street from the old Morgan estate, its white columns gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Perfectly manicured hedges, the circular driveway where I once learned to ride a bike, and the double oak doors that had been slammed in my face the last time I stood there. I was 17 then. "You're a disgrace," my father had said, his voice as cold as the marble floor. My mother wouldn't look at me. My brother Daniel smirked like the king of the castle. And my sister Caroline whispered, "Don't come back." So I didn't, not for Christmas, not for weddings, not even for my mother's funeral 5 years ago. I built a life somewhere else, working jobs that didn't pay much but paid honestly. I raised my son, Oliver, without a penny from them. I learned to live with the ache of being forgotten. And now here I was again, staring at the house that had rejected me because my father was dying. The phone call had come 2 weeks ago. A lawyer named James Whittaker found me in Portland. "Your father, Charles Morgan, is gravely ill," he'd said. "There are matters concerning the estate that require your presence." I almost laughed. Matters concerning the estate. The same estate I was disinherited from as a teenager. The same fortune that was supposed to go entirely to Daniel, the golden son, and Caroline, the perfect daughter. But James's tone had carried something else, something deliberate. "It would be unwise not to come," he'd said, so I came. When I walked into the grand foyer, it was like stepping into a time capsule. The same oil paintings of ancestors staring down with disapproval. The same crystal chandelier that my grandmother claimed was imported from Italy. The same scent of polish and roses. And the same people. Daniel stood at the bottom of the staircase, his tailored suit hugging a body that had never done a day of real work. Caroline perched on the settee, perfectly made up despite the occasion, her pearls catching the light. And then my father, Charles Morgan, propped up in a wheelchair, his once powerful frame reduced to angles and shadows. His voice rasped like dry paper when he spoke. "Rachel," hearing my name in his voice after so long nearly broke something in me, but I kept my spine straight. "Father," Caroline scoffed. "So the prodigal finally returns." Daniel folded his arms. "What are you doing here? You think you can sniff around for money now that he's sick?" "I was invited," I said evenly. "By his lawyer." Right on cue, James Whittaker stepped into the room. Mid-50s, graying at the temples, his briefcase clasped like a weapon. "That's correct. Mr. Morgan requested her presence before the reading of the will." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "The will, that's already settled." James's expression didn't flicker. "Not exactly." Dinner that night was torture. My father sat at the head of the table, too weak to eat, but his eyes tracked every word, every motion. Daniel boasted about his latest property development. Caroline detailed the plans for her upcoming gala. Neither asked about my life. When they did address me, it was barbed. "So, Rachel," Caroline said sweetly, slicing her salmon with surgical precision. "Still working those, what was it, odd jobs, restaurants, cleaning, things like that?" I set down my fork. "I run a community center in Portland now. We provide after-school programs, job training, and meals for low-income families." Daniel laughed. "Charity work, figures, always chasing lost causes." My father coughed and silence fell. His hand trembled as he gestured toward James. "Tomorrow," he whispered. "Read it tomorrow." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Read what?" But my father's eyes had already closed, exhaustion overtaking him. The next morning, the entire family gathered in the library. Heavy curtains muted the sunlight, and the scent of leather-bound books filled the room. James Whittaker sat at the mahogany desk, spreading out papers with deliberate care. Caroline crossed her legs elegantly. Daniel tapped impatient fingers against the armrest. I sat apart, my hands folded in my lap, my pulse hammering. James cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Charles Morgan." Daniel leaned back, smug. "We all know how this goes. The estate goes to me and Caroline as it should." But James kept reading. "To my son Daniel and daughter Caroline, I leave the sum of $1 each." The room exploded. "What?" Daniel surged to his feet. "This is a joke." Caroline's face flushed crimson. "He's delirious. He doesn't know what he's signing." James raised a hand. "I assure you, these documents were signed and notarized last year when Mr. Morgan was of sound mind." Daniel turned to my father, who sat silently in his wheelchair, eyes half closed but lips curved in the faintest smile. And then James read the next line. "To my estranged daughter Rachel Morgan, I leave the entirety of my estate. The house, the land, the investments, and controlling shares of Morgan Industries. The silence that followed was deafening. Caroline's pearl necklace rattled against her collarbone. Daniel's fists clenched white-knuckled. And me? I sat frozen, my father's words echoing in my ears. The forgotten daughter, the disowned child, the one cast aside, the heir. The aftermath was immediate chaos. This is fraud, Daniel roared. She manipulated him. She hasn't been here in decades. Caroline turned to James. You can't seriously let this stand. She doesn't know the first thing about running Morgan Industries. James adjusted his glasses calmly. On the contrary, Mr. Morgan has left very specific instructions. Rachel is to assume control immediately. Effective today, Daniel's face twisted with rage. I won't accept this. I finally spoke, my voice cutting through their protests. You don't have a choice. All eyes turned to me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the powerless teenager they cast out. I wasn't the broken girl begging for acceptance. I was the heir to everything they thought was theirs. And I intended to make them pay for every single day they made me feel unwanted. The ink on the will wasn't even dry before Daniel launched his first attack. You don't get to walk in after 25 years and steal what we've built, he hissed that afternoon, cornering me in the corridor outside Father's study. His breath smelled of scotch, though it was barely noon. What you've built? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Daniel, the company was bleeding money until I left. Father covered for your mistakes again and again. Don't pretend you carried any of this. His jaw tightened, a vein pulsing near his temple. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, but I do, I said quietly, because unlike you, I worked my way up from nothing. I know what it means to earn every dollar, every ounce of respect. And now, thanks to Father, I own everything you thought was yours. He slammed his fist against the wall so hard that a painting rattled on its hook. This isn't over. By evening, Caroline tried her own tactic. She entered the library with a tray of tea, dressed in one of her endless silk blouses, her perfume cloying as it filled the air. She set the tray down with a delicate clink. Rachel, she began sweetly, we've had our differences. But surely you see how impractical this arrangement is. You've been gone too long, you don't understand the business. Daniel and I, well, we've dedicated our lives to it. I nearly laughed. Caroline had never stepped foot on a construction site, never once read a financial report. Her dedication consisted of attending galas and posing for glossy magazine spreads about the Morgan legacy. Still, I kept my tone calm. Caroline, Father made his choice. You don't have to like it, but you do have to live with it. Her eyes flashed, though her voice stayed smooth. Or perhaps we can test the will. Higher experts claim Father wasn't of sound mind. You can try, I said, meeting her gaze. But you and I both know Father was never sharper than when he was angry. And he was furious with you. That broke her mask for a moment, the fury beneath slipping out. You think you can humiliate us and walk away unscathed? I'm not walking away, I said. I'm taking my place. And I promise you, Caroline, you'll regret underestimating me. The next morning, I walked into Morgan Industries headquarters for the first time in my adult life. The building loomed against the Portland skyline, 30 floors of glass and steel, a monument to my father's ambition. Employees glanced up as I passed through the lobby, whispers following me like a tide. Some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. James walked beside me, his briefcase in hand. Expect resistance, he murmured. Your siblings will rally anyone they can to their side. I wouldn't expect anything less, I replied. We took the elevator to the top floor, the executive suite. Daniel was already there, leaning against Father's old desk like he owned it. Caroline perched on the corner, flipping through a magazine as if she were waiting for an appointment. You're late, Daniel snapped. I wasn't aware I answered to you, I said, setting my bag down. This office isn't yours, Caroline interjected. It belongs to the head of the company. Daniel, James stepped forward. Actually, per the transfer of ownership outlined in the will, Rachel Morgan is now the majority shareholder and CEO of Morgan Industries, effective immediately. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Daniel's face flushed crimson. This is insanity. She's been gone for decades. She doesn't know the first thing about this company. Then I suppose it's a good thing you've been running it so flawlessly, I said dryly. Tell me, Daniel, how's the Riverside development going? He froze, his mouth half open. I pressed. The project that's 2 years behind schedule and 40 million over budget. The one investors are threatening to pull out of. Remind me again how you've dedicated your life to this business? Silence. For once, Daniel had no snappy retort. Caroline's magazine crinkled in her grip. I leaned across the desk, my voice low and deliberate. I may have been gone, but don't mistake absence for ignorance. I've done my homework, every failed project, every mismanaged fund, every corner you cut that cost workers their jobs. I know it all. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. Caroline's pearls rattled against her collarbone. And for the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. That night, I stayed in the house for the first time since I was 17. The guest room had been prepared, the linens crisp, the air faintly scented with lavender. But sleep wouldn't come. I walked the halls instead, memories pressing against me with every step. The study where father once slammed his fist and told me I wasn't his daughter anymore. The staircase where Caroline hissed that I was nothing but a stain on the family name. The dining room where Daniel spilled wine down my dress and laughed while everyone else joined in. They had erased me, dismissed me, tried to crush me. And now here I was, back in their world, holding the keys to everything they thought they controlled. But I knew them. Daniel and Caroline wouldn't surrender quietly. They'd scheme, manipulate, tear me down if they could. The question wasn't whether they'd strike, it was when, and I intended to be ready. The first strike came faster than I expected. 2 days later, a headline blared across the Portland Tribune. Estranged daughter named CEO amidst Morgan family turmoil. The article painted me as an opportunist, swooping in at the 11th hour to seize control of a fortune I had no claim to. Quotes from anonymous sources described me as unstable, reckless, and vindictive. I didn't need to guess who those sources were. James placed the paper on my desk with a sigh. We expected this. I skimmed the article, my jaw tightening. Then we'll answer it. How? He asked. By doing what Daniel and Caroline never could, I said. We'll prove I belong here, not with words, with results. At the next board meeting, the room buzzed with tension. The directors, all men who had once worshipped my father, watched me with barely concealed skepticism. Daniel sat among them, his arms crossed, his glare promising sabotage. Caroline lounged beside him, her lips curved in a satisfied smile. I stood at the head of the table. You've all read the will, I began. You know the situation. I won't waste time defending my right to be here. My father made his decision, and it's legally binding. What I will do is prove why he chose me. I clicked the remote, and the screen lit up with slides: financial projections, project timelines, community initiatives. Data I'd spent weeks compiling, prepared the moment James first called me. Riverside is bleeding money, I said. It's mismanaged, overextended, and bleeding investor confidence. But it's salvageable if we change course now. I outlined the plan: renegotiated contracts, transparent reporting, community partnerships to rebuild trust. As I spoke, I saw some of the directors lean forward, their skepticism softening into curiosity. Daniel interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. This is naive. Investors don't care about community partnerships, they care about profit. Exactly, I replied. And without community support, there is no profit. Without trust, there is no future. You've been chasing short-term gains while burning every bridge that kept us afloat. That ends now. The room buzzed with murmurs. Daniel's face reddened. Caroline's lips pressed into a thin line. When the meeting ended, several directors approached me quietly, shaking my hand, thanking me for the clarity. One even whispered, "Your father would be proud." And just like that, the tide began to shift. But that night, when I returned to the estate, the war was waiting. Caroline sat in the parlor, a glass of wine in her hand, her smile sharp as broken glass. Enjoy your little victory today? I set my bag down. If you're here to gloat, don't bother. The board's starting to see through you. Her laugh was soft and cruel. Oh, Rachel, you think this is about boardrooms and business deals? This is about reputation, about blood. You can't erase the past 25 years. You're the forgotten daughter for a reason. And when we're finished with you, you'll wish you'd stayed gone. Her words cut, but beneath them I heard something else. Fear. Because for the first time in our lives, Caroline knew I wasn't going anywhere, and neither was my revenge. The storm broke 3 weeks later. It began with whispers, anonymous tips to journalists about my unstable past. A photo of me at 19, glassy-eyed at some college party, plastered across tabloids. New CEO with troubled history, the headlines screamed. Reporters camped outside Morgan Industries, shoving microphones at me as I stepped from my car. Daniel and Caroline's fingerprints were all over it. James shut my office door that morning, his face grim. They're trying to destroy your credibility, and it's working. Investors are jittery, some are threatening to pull out of Riverside. I paced the room, fury boiling. I won't let them win, James, but if they want war, then war is what they'll get. The war escalated fast. 2 days later, an anonymous report surfaced alleging financial misconduct under my name. The evidence was sloppy, fabricated bank transfers, falsified signatures, but damaging enough to trigger an internal investigation. Daniel strutted through headquarters like a conquering hero, whispering poison in every ear. Caroline, meanwhile, played the grieving widow in public. At charity galas, she clutched pearls and shook her head sadly. Rachel means well, she told one reporter, but she's in over her head. Poor Thomas never realized how fragile she really is. For a moment, I almost faltered. Almost. But then I remembered Father's words during one of his rare moments of softness. Don't fight their fire with fire, Rachel. Fight it with proof. And proof I had. The break came thanks to Angela, the estate's oldest housekeeper, who had worked for my family longer than I'd been alive. One evening she knocked softly on my study door, her hands trembling as she held out a small tin box. Your father told me to give you this, she whispered, but only if Caroline and Daniel tried to ruin you. Inside, beneath layers of yellowed receipts, lay a flash drive. The files it contained were dynamite. Secret ledgers, offshore accounts, proof of Daniel's embezzlement stretching back a decade. Even better, audio recordings of Caroline scheming with a contractor to funnel company funds into her personal estate renovations. James nearly fell out of his chair as we scrolled through the evidence. Rachel, this is the nail in their coffin. No, I corrected softly, staring at the screen. This is the whole coffin. The next board meeting was supposed to be Daniel's triumph. He'd been rallying directors behind closed doors, promising stability if I were removed. Caroline swept into the room on his arm, draped in diamonds, smiling like victory was already hers. But I was ready. As Daniel launched into a fiery speech about my instability and reckless leadership, I let him run, let him dig the grave deeper. And when he finished, basking in self-satisfaction, I stood. Thank you, Daniel, I said calmly, for proving once again that your talent lies not in business but in fiction. I nodded to James. He dimmed the lights and the projector flickered on. Slide after slide appeared. Wire transfers to Daniel's hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands. Photos of Caroline's new villa in Hilton Head, built with company funds. And then, the audio recording. Caroline's voice filled the room. We'll bleed it slowly, Daniel. No one will notice. By the time Rachel's name is even mentioned, we'll be untouchable. The room erupted. Directors shifted uncomfortably, murmuring among themselves. One demanded, Is this authentic? It's been verified, James said firmly, by two independent forensic accountants. Daniel's face drained of color. Caroline's diamonds seemed to weigh her down. You forged this, Daniel shouted desperately. It's a trick. Really? I asked, stepping closer. Because the state attorney general doesn't think so. As if on cue, the boardroom doors opened. Two men in dark suits entered, badges gleaming. Daniel Morgan, Caroline Morgan, you are under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud shareholders. Gasps rippled across the table. Daniel stumbled back, his confidence shattered. Caroline tried to stand, but one of the agents laid a firm hand on her shoulder. This isn't over, Daniel spat as they led him away. You'll regret this, Rachel? But his voice cracked. And for the first time in my life, he looked small. The fallout was swift. Headlines shifted overnight. Forgotten daughter exposes family corruption. Rachel Morgan saves Morgan Industries from collapse. Investors who once doubted me now clamored for meetings. The Riverside project regained momentum under my leadership. Caroline struck a plea deal within weeks. Daniel, too arrogant to negotiate, faced trial. Their empire of lies crumbled, leaving me the sole steward of my father's legacy. But victory tasted bittersweet. One night, I walked through the empty halls of the estate, stopping at father's portrait. His stern eyes stared back, the same eyes that once dismissed me as nothing. You could have stopped them yourself, I whispered, but instead you left it to me. Silence answered. Maybe that was his final test. Maybe he'd known all along I was the only one strong enough to face them. Months later, at the annual shareholders' gala, I stood on stage beneath glittering chandeliers. The room was packed with executives, employees, journalists. My voice carried steady and sure. Morgan Industries is no longer a story of greed and betrayal. It is a story of renewal. We will rebuild not just structures of steel and stone, but trust, integrity, and community. Applause thundered through the ballroom. And as I looked out at the faces, some supportive, some skeptical, all watching me, I felt something settle inside me. I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was the heir who returned, not for revenge alone, but to build something lasting. Still, when I closed my eyes that night, I saw Daniel's face as they dragged him away, twisted with rage and disbelief. And I realized something father had never understood. Revenge doesn't end when your enemies fall. It ends when you no longer need to prove you belong. And at last, I didn't.